Cano. I am a climate communications expert and journalist, and it is my pleasure to be moderating today this event, the only event at this SB56 around buildings and construction, understanding emissions, setting Paris-compatible targets, and providing inputs to the enhanced transparency framework and the global stocktake, the backbones, accountability backbones of the Paris Agreement. And it is my pleasure to be sharing today the podium with in-person speakers, but also with 4 remote participants who I'm going to introduce right after. I have the pleasure to introduce you to Ramiro Fernandez. Ramiro is the campaign director for Race to Zero and Race to Resilience from the high-level climate champions. Ramiro, thank you for joining us today. I also have Jigme. Hi, Jigme. Super nice to see you. Jigme is from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and he's manager of the Transparency Division. It is my pleasure also to present you Oliver Rapp. Oliver is joining us from Brussels. Here today, he just took the tallies and he will be back. It's amazing how transportation these days allow this fast moving. And Oliver Rapp is the author of, one of the lead authors of the compendium that we are going to launch today, and he's representing the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. And last in person but not least, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Monsieur Stephane Crouzat, climate ambassador from France. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for taking the time. I know these are very busy days. Thank you very much. And we are online for speakers that I'm going to introduce to you as well. We have Nora Storer from the Global Alliance from Buildings and Construction. She's connecting remotely. We also hear remotely from Régis Meyer from the Ministry of the Ecological Transition from France, from Jérémy Bourgault from the Agence Française du Développement, the AFD, and also working for the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. And we will hear from Elisabeth Chege. Elisabeth Chege, Energy Efficiency and Cooling Specialist for Sustainable for All, and she's chairing the World Green Building Council from Africa. We will be hearing from her in the summary, closing up and looking forward to COP27. And without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Ramiro Fernandez to introduce us to the sleeping giant, the buildings and construction sector from the perspective of the global climate action agenda. Please, Ramiro.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations for the report that has been launched today. An excellent compendium that is coming out, so going to be very useful. As many of you know, the high-level champions, since they were created, actually since the Global Climate Action Agenda was set up under the UNFCCC process in the way to Paris with the Lima Paris Action Agenda, it was structured and organized through different thematic areas and thematic areas of work, being building and constructions and human settlements, one of those from the very beginning. In 2019, the Marrakesh Partnership members, they launched the pathways to 1.5 from different areas and sectors. And yesterday, in the World Café for the Global Stocktake, it was very much highlighted by different parties and non-state actors, the relevance and how these sectorial approaches can help accelerate the implementation of existing NDCs when they include these sectors within their NDCs, but also to enhance ambition, because the sectorial approaches and the work together gives the opportunity to highlight areas of improvement for different countries and parties within their NDCs. And I do think that this sector, the building and construction, is one of those areas that it has a massive potential contribution to enhance future action, future NDCs, because, as you said, Marianne, at the opening, in many sectors, in many areas, we do know it is the sleeping giant. You know, there's a huge potential to enhance, to reduce emissions, but also there's a huge risk if we keep the business as usual trends on future emissions in these areas. So definitely this compendium comes in a critical moment And very much it was also highlighted yesterday how important it is the role and the need to connect what the non-state actors are doing in different areas with the national governments and national areas. And the compendium aims to do that, aims to bring together these different actors, knowing that it is a very fragmented space where addressing building and construction is not like the steel industry. We need to work with all the areas and industries and different sectors, and working with local governments, energy sectors, with national governments. So it's a massive challenge that working into that area. So this compendium also helps to bring into that area that direction. And finally, members were also requesting yesterday that there is a clear lack of data, of compatible data on many areas and sectors, and more in developing countries. And the compendium, it provides an excellent guidance for developing countries about how they can collect, assess, measure, and report, analyze this sector in a more consistent way related to their emissions. So I think it provides very good guidance and ideas. It helps connecting parties and non-party stakeholders. So we're really looking forward to see how the information, the analysis, and the tools that the compendium presents will support non-state actors and also national governments to enhance and accelerate climate action and enhance their NDCs and long-term strategies in this sector on the way forward. From the climate champions and on the plans on the way forward, we launched last year the 2030 breakthroughs. There is a specific breakthrough for building and construction with key milestones and targets, and we're engaging right now with the Egyptian presidency and with our partners to bring progress and show the progress on the 2030 breakthrough on building and construction by Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, building on the success of the Built Environment Day that we had in Glasgow. So we're very much looking forward to commit and engage into that direction with all of you. So with this, I will congratulate you for the compendium again, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Ramiro. Thank you for your presence. We know that you may need to leave earlier, so we want to thank you.
For the initial end.
Thank you very much. So, as Ramiro said, the building and construction sectors are sleeping giants. We are talking about 37% of the energy-related emissions. This is more than transport and more than industry emissions. And we often, when we think about emissions, we picture exhaustion pipes, tails, we picture land degradation, deforestation, which is the case, but we also need to give visibility to the built environment. And with that objective at COP21, France put buildings at the center of the agenda, and that was the birthplace of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions, and many good things that happened, like last year, the breakthroughs in Paris, in Glasgow. And without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Crouzat from France. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on organizing this event and on this compendium. We have one of the lead authors right next to us, so it's really my pleasure to really congratulate you for this very timely presentation of the compendium. You were talking about the sleeping giant. You mentioned 37% of energy-related emissions are due to the building sector. It's 21% of all greenhouse gas emissions is the building sector. So we tend to forget that. And it's absolutely essential that we concentrate our minds on addressing these 21% of emissions. And it's particularly important because we know that we're going to increase the built areas. You know, we'll double the built areas within the next 30 years, and those will happen in Asia, in Africa. Of course, Europe is doing quite a lot, and in fact, you know, France is working towards decarbonized building stocks in 2050. With countries such as Denmark, where we've been the first to introduce in our technical regulation life cycle carbon thresholds for new buildings. We're doing this doing it this year. So Europe is doing a lot of great things and trying to work also towards zero positive emission buildings. It's something that is becoming more and more part of the discussion in the architecture circles, and we have now the technology to really have these positive energy buildings. But we need to work elsewhere as well, and we need to work in Africa and in Asia, because so many buildings will be built, and we mustn't miss the chance of doing that. That's why we have, there are a couple of things that really need to be done. First of all, energy efficiency, absolutely key. It reduces energy demand and thus generates many co-benefits. The cheapest energy is the one that is not consumed. It's an old saying, but it's really worth repeating. And also what's interesting is that we have, on the energy efficiency front, we have countries have realized how important it is. It is the second, energy efficiency in the building sector is the second most cited policy in nationally determined contributions after renewable energy development. So really energy efficiency is absolutely key here in driving the reflection. But in order to achieve climate neutrality, new challenges need to be taken up, and that is the decarbonization of materials, products, components used in the construction of buildings. We need to move towards frugality of design and use. It was highlighted in the IPCC third report. Increase electrification and the development of on-site energy, renewable energy sources. So, international cooperation, that's the point of the global ABC, launched at COP21, which was, we were very instrumental, I like to say, in launching this alliance. It now works with a multitude of countries ranging from Morocco, Senegal, Tunisia, United Arab Emirates, Vietnam, Mexico, and many others. And it also has a tremendous secretariat, which is very important for any alliance to be thriving. It's now recognized as the international forum for the decarbonization of the building sector, as underlined in the recent G7 Climate and Energy and Environment Ministerial Communique, which just came out. And on the operations side, the program for energy efficiency and buildings has been providing political and technical assistance to the global IBC since 2018, involving the French Development Agency in particular, the GIZ, and so on. And then finally, we think that the building sector is so important that it deserves an extra push. And you remember how in Glasgow there were the Glasgow breakthroughs on power, road transport, steel, hydrogen, and we feel there is space for a Glasgow breakthrough on the building sector. And so we're currently exploring this idea with the UK and the Global ABC Secretariat to try and perhaps promote something along that lines in Sharm el-Sheikh. So congratulations again.
Thank you, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. And it's a perfect segue. You were describing how it was, with what vision the Global ABC was launched in Paris, and a year after in Marrakesh, the program for energy efficiency in buildings was created. The Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction has been a big support to the UNFCCC, the BPIE, and the PEEB in making this event possible. And I would like now to give the floor to Nora Storer, who's connecting with us remotely. Nora, who's program officer at the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions. Nora, the floor is yours.
I hope you can see my screen okay. Can I just get a thumbs up? Yes, fantastic. Thank you for giving me the thumbs up. Allow me just first of all to thank specifically the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings for organizing this, and congratulations also on the report. And special thanks also to Monsieur Crouzat for his warm words, but also for the continued French support. And indeed, French was instrumental for founding the Global ABC at COP21 and continues to be instrumental for the Global ABC. So I really wish I could be there in person and meet you and say hello. But nevertheless, I'm happy to at least be here in this manner. So some of the facts and figures that I would like to share with you here today on the Global Status Report on Buildings and Construction and buildings on their way to COP27 have already been shared, but sometimes it helps to repeat, so I hope you'll indulge me. We've heard already that it is a massive opportunity, buildings and construction. We estimate that the equivalent of Paris is added on floor space every 5 days, and that half of the buildings standing in 2050, 2060, depending on what model you use, have not yet been built. And yet it is the most cost-effective, or one of the most cost-effective mitigation potential of any industrial sector, and it has a massive co-benefits, including job creation. The IFC estimates a 24.7 trillion investment opportunity for green buildings, and 2/3 of global wealth approximately is stored in real estate. So the figures are quite impressive here. We already heard about the Global ABC. I won't spend a lot of time on this, just to say that indeed we were founded at COP21. We started with 79 members and we are now 238 members. So we have really experienced a lot of growth, especially in the last 2 years, really reflecting the growing awareness of the importance of that sector. And this includes 36 countries. And we are united in a common vision, a zero-emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector. Our vision comes strongly from the UNFCCC Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. It is a forum for uniting all the non-party stakeholders that by 2030 we need to have emissions from the built environment, and by 2050 this needs to be expanded to decarbonization along the life cycle. And roughly speaking, our three key goals and associated activities is to be a catalyst for deep collaboration, to track progress and to support countries based on their situation, and always with and through countries and relevant respective ministries. Okay, a few facts and figures. So some of the facts and figures, as I said, were already mentioned. So I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but I think I would really like to share with you this slide because I think it gives hope. And that's important because it can sometimes seem overwhelming, the massive task that we have ahead of us. But we do see this slide here compares 2 time points, 2015 and 2020. And we do see that we have really made progress. And by we, I mean the buildings and construction community. So if you look at NDCs, and it was already mentioned that building energy efficiency is the second most mentioned measure after renewable energy. And we actually see a growth of 55% plus countries now mentioning buildings in their NDCs. Actually, it's more now even. It's not, we are now at 147, not even 136. So it's 146, not 136. So it continues to grow. Also for building codes, energy intensity is down, emissions intensity is down. So the point I'm trying to make here is we're making progress. The direction is right, but the speed is not. And this graph illustrates that the speed is not right. We need to do much more and we need to be much, much faster. This is our global climate tracker that BPIE, who and Oliver is of course with us, has developed for the 2020 release of the Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction. And this graph here is based on data from 2020. And what you see here is if we want to achieve the goal of zero carbon building stock by 2050, and if we just ignored the fact that 2020 was a strange year regarding COVID, it actually looks as though we are on track to that goal by 2050. But if you calculate the COVID-19 impacts out, we are far away from the track. So we do need to move a lot faster. Allow me to say, sorry, before I go on into the social figures, that the 37% of energy-related CO2 emissions, that is correct and was already mentioned. It is actually very likely an underestimate. So actually, we're probably looking at a higher level, a higher percentage of emissions, because certain things like bricks or chemical reactions from cement production, like related to clinker, is not included in that. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so in terms of jobs, we're looking at 9 to 30 jobs in manufacturing and construction being created for every $1 million invested. That's a lot more than many other sectors. And at least for Europe, 60% of home retrofit expenditure actually goes towards labor. So there is really a strong sales point here to be made. It's not just, quote unquote, just about climate. It really also is about livelihoods and jobs. And here you can see a slide about codes. And I mentioned earlier already that codes, it is also growing the number of countries that are mentioning that have building energy codes in place. That is good. What is not good is that in the percentage of countries that have mandatory building energy codes for the entire sector in place, it's only 22%. So really, it's not sufficient, and we need to move much faster. Building energy codes are a very important pillar to push the market forward. It's very different by region. So for instance, in the MENA region, actually we're at 44%. So their enforcement is a bigger issue. In Africa, we're at 9%. And in Africa, of course, we're looking at massive construction growth in the next decade. So this is very important. Okay, I will skip over this because Monsieur Crouzat already mentioned this, which is fantastic. The fact that energy efficiency is in buildings is often mentioned is the second most mentioned one in NDCs. So let me go straight to the roadmaps, and that will be my last point. The global ABC also works with countries, as I said, through building decarbonization roadmaps. Now we have a global roadmap in place, and we have 3 regional ones in place for Africa, Asia, and Latin America, fully recognizing that these are vast and diverse regions. We developed these with the input of 700 stakeholders from all around the globe. So that, in our minds, gives it a certain degree of legitimacy, that it's not just something that we put on the table. And the idea is that we need to transform the sector through 8 key areas, and that's urban planning, new buildings, existing buildings, operations, appliances, materials, resilience, and clean energy. Each of these have targets by 2030 and 2050, and each of these have priority technology and policy measures. Now, what we're doing currently is we're breaking this down, we're cascading it, if you will, to the sub-regional and the national and local level. And this is, in our minds, a very hopeful thing. These roadmaps are then often associated with the country's NDCs. We're working, for instance, in Vietnam and Cambodia. The processes there are almost finalized. And some of our members, some of our countries are beginning to take this roadmap model and apply it themselves, which I think is very good. It's a sort of franchising. We think this is fantastic. Of course, this is all in the public domain. So the UAE, for example, they have taken this model and they are currently developing roadmaps for 22 Arab states themselves. And we are very excited about this. And this will also be launched at COP27. Okay, if you want to find out more, globalabc.org is our address, and you can contact us at global.abc@un.org. We are extremely excited about COP27. I was very pleased to also hear from Ramiro earlier. Thank you for sharing with us also a little bit your plans. We are, of course, working very closely with the climate champions through the Building to COP coalition, and we are working towards having buildings have a strong presence at COP27 through things like the Buildings Breakthrough. Thank you to France. Once again, we're very excited about this prospect, and through hopefully, potentially, Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day, something to that effect, though, of course, the decision there is up to the host, Egypt. Thank you very much, and back over to you, to the panelists.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you very much. This was not an X-ray, it was an MRI of the building sector. I invite everyone to really go and read the global status report, because it is very rich, and it is incredible what this group of over 250 members have reached to do in such a short time. I mean, it's 7 years since the Global Alliance was created, and it is amazing. Thank you, Nora, for that. And I would really like to say a special hello to Jigme, a former colleague of mine. Jigme knows a lot of NDCs, long-term strategies, and especially a lot about the transparency framework, which is really the backbone. What is at the heart of the accountability system of the Paris Agreement. And we are now going to hear from Jigme, manager of the Transparency Division at the UNFCCC, what climate action in the building and construction sector in the context of the climate change negotiations, what we must know about this. Jigme, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariana. Ambassador Crouzat, fellow speakers, dear distinguished participants, both in person and those who are connected remotely. Let me first extend a very warm welcome to Bonn on behalf of UNFCCC Secretariat. I know it's Saturday, quite late in the evening, so I hope we can close this so that we can enjoy nice warm weather outside. I'm happy to be here and share some perspective, some thoughts of how we see the whole process going forward. And here, I wanted to take a moment and step back and look at what we have managed to achieve so far. Because in lead up to now, the journey has been long. It has not been easy, but I think we have had tremendous success. Glasgow was a significant milestone for the process at large for the global community after Paris in 2015, where we adopted the Paris Agreement itself, and then the another one being in Katowice in 2018, where we managed to finalize most of the core operational rules to implement the Paris Agreement. And at the cost of repeating myself, I want to highlight some of the things that we see as key outcomes of Glasgow that represent significant progress going forward in our effort to address climate change. The package itself covers full spectrum of Paris Agreement, including strengthened efforts to increase resilience, to curb emission profiles going forward as urgently as possible, and then also to mobilize and provide financial resources for both mitigation as well as adaptation. Another significant outcome coming from Glasgow was this reaffirmation of the pledge of providing $100 billion, and that I think is also important outcome, given that this will have positive impact across whole sector. Parties also agreed to work urgently to reduce the significant gap that we see between existing emission reduction plans and the level of emission that is prescribed by science for us to be on this 1.5 degree goal. And for the first time ever in this UNFCCC process, parties have agreed to touch on phasing down this unabated use of coal, as well as inefficient subsidies for fossil fuel. And then finally, we have now all the operational rules that are needed to implement the Paris Agreement, which changes the whole dynamics because it puts us in a different phase, the implementation phase. The design phase is over now, and now we are in an implementation phase. Unfortunately, we do not have much time to wait. That implementation needs to happen as urgently as possible. Because we the current actions are far short of what is required by science. In IPCC, this is very well-known information by this time now. As per IPCC, the emissions need to decline by 45% by 2030 compared to the levels in 2010. And it has to reach net zero by 2050. Now, if you compare this with the estimated emissions that we can see from the implementation of NDCs in 2030, it is estimated that the emissions would be in other direction. We expect emissions to be 14% higher than compared to 2010 level. So it is, in fact, in other directions. So the gap is much significant. So this goes on to show that we will need urgent and ambitious action from every corner, from every actor, and from every sector. And that includes building and construction sector. And Ambassador Crouzat and Nora had already mentioned that energy efficiency in building sector is reflected as one of the, in most of NDCs. In addition to that, I would also say that 6% of communicated NDCs include reflect building sector, concrete mitigation target for building sector. So 6% also include the actions in building as a part of their commitment itself, which I think it's significant, but we will need more, obviously. There are many challenges and opportunities, in my view, in the building sector as it continues to its part to decarbonize and also enhance climate resilience. And to that end, support and capacity, I believe, will play a key role in maximizing the ability to address the challenges and harness the opportunities. And that will be particularly the case for developing countries where capacity can be an issue. So to that end, we in the Secretariat, we were quite excited when we had this opportunity to partner with our colleagues here, with GIZ Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, the Building Performance Institute in Europe, UNEP, Global Alliance for Building and Construction, to work on a tool, technical tool, that could help develop, particularly developing countries, to unlock these opportunities that exist. And I do hope that this compendium serves as a useful tool for them, to help them to make informed science and evidence-based decision and policy choices, and which in turn can allow them to harness the maximum possible ambition within this sector. So I look forward to continue working with our partners, because producing a compendium is just the start of the journey. We will need to now find ways to take this tool, take it to the ground, and help them digest this tool, so that this tool becomes much more meaningful and impactful. So thank you so much for your attention, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jigme. And as you said, we must absolutely bend that curve. And the heavy lifters, the major emitting sectors like the building and construction sector has a lot to do. But we need to help developing countries. As we speak in these 2 weeks of the SB 56, two surfaces as big as Paris, like 2 Parises will be built as we speak. like this, popping out from the ground, and we need to make sure that this is done right. And this is mainly happening in the fast developing countries, and with them in mind, this Buildings Monitoring Compendium has been developed. And without further delay, I would like to give the floor to Oliver Raft, who's the Executive Director of Buildings Performance Institute Europe and one of the leading authors of this compendium. Please, Oliver, the floor is yours.
Will you change?
I will, yeah.
Or should I sit there? I can sit there.
You prefer? Yes, sure.
I will do that.
Please, let's do that.
Switch.
So
Thank
you
you.
just need to click on the...
Yes.
over there.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to introduce the compendium for greenhouse gas baselines and monitoring for the buildings and construction sector. It's a long title, it's a complex title, but I think already the title shows a little bit that it's not necessarily a sector where mitigation and also adaptation policies are straightforward. And so when we had the opportunity to work with the UNFCCC Secretariat to prepare the compendium, we were, of course, saying immediately yes, and we formed a partnership with the PEEB, the Program for Energy Efficient Buildings, and GIZ to make it happen. And the purpose of the compendium really is, it was said already, but it is really supposed to be a very, very practical tool for policymakers and practitioners to develop mitigation strategies, to develop strategies how to monitor progress, how to collect data. All of this is, of course, designed to support the development of NDCs, to support the enhanced transparency framework, and to support the global stocktake process. Because what we find is that when we look for data from buildings and construction and really try to pin down the exact climate impact, we find that the data situation is rather difficult. Globally, there are regions which have better data, there are regions which have hardly any data, and so what we're doing annually in the Global Status Report, which Nora Storia mentioned earlier, is where we're trying to describe the situation, but we also have to admit that some of the analysis is based on extrapolation and sometimes on modeling and on estimates. And what we also want to achieve with this compendium is that the situation is simply improving. And so when we look at the document, it has two parts. The first parts, chapters 2 and 3, talk about the sources of the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the sector, about methodologies, how to quantify them. And then the second part is really very practical, describing strategies and measures, and I will go through the two parts in a moment. We also wanted to make sure that this piece does not only talk theoretically about policies and mitigation efforts, and therefore we decided to have over 30 examples in form of different text boxes, over 30 examples from countries from around the world about successful mitigation measures, policies, voluntary programs, and everything else. And of course, we have a glossary, an annex, and a bibliography to make it work. When we look at the situation for buildings and construction, well, we observe, like in many other sectors, the climate impact is growing. This is just a timeline for the last decade. The top orange line is the overall surface growth for buildings globally. And you see there is quite a steep increase in the past decade. The green line below is the global population growth. You see that the line is not as steep, so we have more surface growth, and that simply means that the per capita use of building surface is growing. That's a trend, of course, which is driven by growing wealth, but it's also simply driven by the fact that there are still a lot of people on this planet who do not have access to decent housing. So, of course, the building surface will have to grow globally. The question is, how can we make sure that this does not hinder us from achieving the Paris Agreement. When you look at the two other lines, the bluer lines, one is for the energy, the total energy consumption of the sector, and the other one is for the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. And these two lines are not growing as steeply, but nevertheless, they grow absolutely. The good news is here that we have a certain degree of decoupling between the growth of surface and the growth of energy consumption and emissions. But the bad news is we're not bending the curve. We're still growing both emissions and energy consumption. When we look at the different emission sources, it was said before 37% of global CO2 emissions related to energy come from the sector. But when we look at a more detailed picture, we see that about 10% come from the production of building materials, cement, steel, glass, bricks, what have you, whatever is needed to build a building, to erect a building, is about 10% of that share. If we then look at the question, where do the emissions come from? More from residential buildings, more from commercial buildings. You see the split up there. But it's also interesting to ask the question, well, how much of these emissions are actually direct, really coming right out of the individual building, and how much are indirect? And so you see already you have a complexity here. You have these different emission sources. And therefore, it's very, very important to actually get the accounting right, the accounting of emission sources. And the compendium is following here the 2006 IPCC guidelines on the national greenhouse gas inventories. And what you cannot really see on the right side, because it's way too small, is a typical picture of how you can construct such an inventory. But it shows you with the blue text and the yellow text, blue is for indirect emissions, yellow is for direct emissions, which of the various subsectors are contributing to the overall climate impact of buildings and construction. And of course, we're applying here the principle of source accounting, and the distinction between direct and indirect emissions is important because it requires different mitigation policies. If one wants to reduce these emissions, we have to address different actors, and therefore we need to have different policies in place and different support programs. When we look at this question again, well, how much of the climate impact is actually caused by the buildings in operation and how much through the construction? We find that on the global average, more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions from the sector are caused in the use phase. So that's normally for heating, for cooling, for lighting. Some inventories also include cooking energy, but about 70% versus 30% is the global relationship. Now, we have countries where this relationship might be completely different. If you have a country which has a very ambitious standard for new buildings, such as Denmark, this relationship will be different. It could then well be that more than 50% of the climate impact is caused through the construction material, because the building itself is already that efficient and is powered by renewable energy that the greenhouse gas emission share of the operation of the building, the use of the building, is very, very small. So this is truly a global figure, but it gives us some kind of indication. And if we then look at the different stages, the life cycle stages of a building, we have the product stage, then we have the construction stage, we have the operational phase, the use phase, and the end use. It is very important to recognize then, and this is what you see here, again, that the construction process itself, so what's happening on the construction side, and the end of life impact is relatively small. I'm not saying they should be neglected. Of course, they have to be addressed as well. But if we want to ask the question, where should we prioritize actions, it is clearer and more obvious that it is in the use phase as a priority number one, then in the production phase, production of building materials, cement, glass, steel, bricks, whatever is being used. And then priority three should be what's happening on the construction side and the end of life. And of course, the end-of-life challenge is asking the question, to what degree can we really come to a circular construction industry? That is, I think, a debate which is only just starting, because it creates many challenges and questions whether building materials which have been used in one building can be used again in another building. I know France is really taking that approach very, very seriously and developing policies on that, but it's not trivial. That's clear. And so when we then look at the different stages of mitigation actions, the compendium includes this cycle, and it's a cycle is a never-ending story, and so it is really important that first of all a country is quantifying the impact, the emissions coming from buildings and construction, and then it's going through the various stages of identifying priorities, developing policies, but then also monitor the policies, really monitor what's happening, collaborate with the construction industry, collaborate with other stakeholders. What is also very important when we talk about the mitigation policies is that we take really all the impacts of policies and measures and support programs into account. Because in contrast to some of the other heavy emitting sectors, in contrast, for example, to the steel sector, construction and buildings address all of us. We spend our lives in buildings. Today we are inside a building, and you spend probably much of your week here in buildings. At home you're in buildings. Whether a building is performing well for us or not is something we feel immediately. Not only in terms of the question whether it's efficient, but also in terms of the question whether it's well ventilated, whether the air inside is good, whether there is enough daylight, whether the architecture speaks to us and makes us feel comfortable. And so when we develop policies which make buildings more sustainable, there are these many side benefits which you have listed here. And that means that we must deviate from the traditional cost-benefit analysis when thinking about investments in buildings. It's not sufficient to ask the question, well, how much will an efficient building reduce my energy bill? That's of course important, but it should not be, and it cannot be, the main driving indicator, the main driving factor when taking policy decisions. We must look at all these other impacts as well. And as BPIE, we're doing a lot of policy analysis. We're asking the question, well, what actually works and what doesn't work? And we often speak with normal citizens. And when we ask about the barriers or the drivers to investing in upgrading buildings or investing in a highly efficient new building, people hardly ever say, well, I want to reduce my energy bill. They very often say, I want to live in a more comfortable building. I want to have less draft, or I want it to be better cooled in the summer, or what have you. So all these so-called multiple benefits are very, very important when designing policies. And then, of course, when we design these policies, when policymakers think about, well, what is possible, we have a very wide range of policies available. They range from completely voluntary actions, such as labeling of buildings or simply awareness raising, to, on the right-hand side of this graph, to mandatory performance standards for buildings, or even mandatory renovation. In Europe, we have a number of countries where we have mandatory renovation requirements in place already, not necessarily for all buildings, but for certain parts of the building stock. And so there is a broad variety, and as I said, we're mentioning a number of these very practical examples in the compendium, and this is well, of course, you can't read that, but this is really just a copy and paste from the table of content. It just lists all the text boxes we have there, and therefore I would really like to invite you to have a look at the compendium as such. It's, of course, available on the website of the UNFCCC Secretariat, but if you're interested, I also brought a number of memory sticks, which I'm happy to give to you. It's on there. We have them somewhere in the room. This memory stick also contains the global status report for buildings and construction, which Nora Stoyer mentioned before, and a little bit about BPIE. And with that, I would like to close. Thank you very much, Marianne.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Really, it is a source of knowledge. It could be a roadmap for the deep decarbonization of the buildings and construction sector. And I really hope that everybody in this room scan this QR code or take the US memory stick, and people watching us online, they just go to UNFCCC and download the compendium, because it is really a source of very valuable information. And without further delay, I would like now to turn to Paris. Régis Meyer is connecting from the French capital. Régis is a decarbonization expert at the Ministry of the Ecological Transition of France, and he used to be co-chair of the Global Alliance for Building and Construction. He's going to present us the French case from a policy perspective. Régis, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you to invite me to have a short explanation of the key features of the French policy concerning building construction and especially decarbonization. So first, I would like to give a short overview. Do I skip, or do you skip the? Okay, thank you. So for us in France, I think I summarize what is important. That means first, for the policy, we need to transform the building sector. We need a strong and inclusive governance that shape a long-term partnership between regulator, administration, and the building industry, and all the sector of the building industry. So in France, we have what we call the Plan Bâtiment Durable for that partnership, and we have a Conseil supérieur de la construction et de l'efficacité énergétique, where all proposals from the regulator are discussed before validation. So I think it's very important to have that, and I think it's the key of success of the French policy. Second is ambition, a clear ambition. So the ambition, I will explain later, is based on is embedded in two documents or two strategies concerning the National Low Carbon Strategy and Multi-Energy Program. And the building play an important part or role in this strategy. Third, we have the history of enabling regulatory framework which is based on progressive obligation. That means every 5 years we review the regulation and strength the threshold. And that I think is important, this progressive and plan review of the regulation. And the other part is to have really clear that we have support, financial support. Every year it's around 3 billion euro that the state with different type of aid is channeling to the building sector. And I think the important part as well is the nexus with the social focus. As Oliver have said, that we can't isolate this policy with the other part of the building benefit that we have to follow, like a social issue in the building sector. Next one, please. So that shows in one diagram the ambition in France to reduce our emission. So we succeed to reduce only by, I think, something like 12% during the last 7 years. So now we have to speed up, and the aim is to decarbonize fully, almost from 90 million tons of CO2 to 5 million tons of CO2, the emission of the building sector by 2050, and with an intermediate goal on less than the reduction of almost half by 2030 in comparison with 2015. So next one. So that is embedded in what I said in our national policies. So in this National Low Carbon Strategy and Multi-Energy Program are 5 years program that are reviewed. And I want to say that from next year, all that will be coordinated into energy and climate programming law. That means including adaptation. And one part which I wanted to highlight is the ambition to decarbonize the heating of buildings by promoting renewable energy in district heating, by substituting coal-fire heaters or oil-fire boilers, and to promote efficient home wood heating system as well. So in France, we have around 10 million or 9 million homes that are partly or fully heated by wood. And we have the aim to stop using coal or domestic fuel oil for heating at the end of this decade. Next. So, as it was said, energy efficiency first is our policy. It's a European framework, but the ambition is to divide by 3 the energy consumption per quadrat meter of the building stock. So it's a huge challenge that aims that we need to mobilize between 20 to 30 billion euro investment per year, and that leads to financial support around 4 billion per year, what we are almost there. So that means we have the policy settled, and now we have to deliver. Next. So, energy renovation plan, that I would highlight 3 policy, 3 tools that we use. So, energy renovation plan aim to ban or eliminate thermal colander, especially for renovation of low-income household, and as well a progressive ban has been already decided from 2025 to 2034, sorry. And that is very interesting to understand that in France, for instance, we have around 8 million people who are living in this very low efficient housing or building. And that is the priority of the French policy, to focus on this population or type of buildings that are very, very low efficient. But the French policy is based on means to build trust. And for that, it has been decided to promote a certification for enterprises that certifies the quality of work that they can provide, RGE label, and as well a network of one-stop shop assistance, who is called France Rénov, that gave her now all the assistance point for the household. So that's very important to have as well a simple access to information. Next, please. So one thing that I want to highlight, that's the new regulation that is now in force since January this year. That's been one of the first regulation, maybe the first in Europe anyway, including mandatory threshold of carbon for energy and for construction. That's interesting, that it will lead to a decrease of 30% of carbon embedded in the construction from now to 2030. Another point is that we include as well a first attempt to integrate the new the evolution of the climate. That means we don't use the historical climate to design the summer comfort in new buildings, but we take as a reference the last heat wave in 2003. That was the highest registered temperature in France for a long period. So that's now a way to adapt the new design to the future climate.
Regis, may I ask you to please stick to the time? We have one more minute maybe before the next speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Next one, please. Next slide, please. And one thing is important, that's not to focus only on housing, but as well on the tertiary building. And that, I think, is a very interesting way to design policy. First, it has been a voluntary engagement from a tertiary building owner or manager that was first step to set some mandatory threshold to all buildings that are over 1,000 quadrat meter, and with a progressive reinforcement that's been targeting 40% decrease in 2030, 50 in 2040, and 60 in 2050. That means all buildings in France now have obligation to have better, to reduce their energy consumption. And the penalty, if it's not achieved, is based on NMHM and administrative penalties for building owners and per owner and per building. And that is based on obligation to report energy consumption and on a database that is operated by the French Agency for Environment. So it's very interesting that 8 years before, in 2012, it was introduced an obligation of green lease. That means that oblige owner and company that are using building to collaborate to develop a common vision how to improve energy efficiency in the tertiary building. So that it's very interesting to have this long-term vision to be able to, at the end, bring some to set some mandatory threshold of energy efficiency, and that is a new policy starting, and that now put all the industry in the same vision and in progress.
Thank you, Regis. We will have to wrap up, yes? Please. Thank you.
Yes. I wanted to have a phrase to finish because I developed already that about the importance of financial support. And one maybe feature is very interesting in France that we have a white certificate scheme that is obligation on energy supplier that provide subsidies for energy investment and training and finance as well, a training program. And I want to finish on that the training program is very important to the success of this policy.
Very good. Thank you very much, Regis. And without further delay, we now go on with Jérémy Bourgault. Jérémy, who's connecting also from Paris, and he's a program officer at PEEB, the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, and the AFD, the Agence Française du Développement. Jérémy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariana. It's a pleasure joining this important discussion today. The finance sector is central in helping to mobilize and redirect capital flows to decarbonize our economies. Especially in the buildings and construction sector, adequate climate finance is vital to achieve Paris-compatible targets. In 2019, the buildings and construction sector represented $5.8 trillion of annual investments, of which less than 3% went towards energy efficiency. This figure must increase, in particular in developing countries where energy demand will keep growing, pushed by rapid urbanization and rising cooling demand. The building sector also represents 7% of global employment, providing 220 million jobs worldwide. Therefore, massively investing in decarbonization and the resilience of our built environment is a unique opportunity to create local jobs and build capacities, notably in the aftermath of COVID-19. Improving energy security and the resilience to heat and extreme weather events of our infrastructures is therefore and therefore our local communities, is also crucial to lower future disaster risks and support long-lasting social and economic development. Development banks have therefore a special responsibility to support this transition. Development finance institutions actually represent 10% of global annual investments and have a significant role to play in shifting global finance towards greener buildings and construction practices. In 2020, the International Development Finance Club, IDFC, a global coalition of 26 development banks, reported a total of $16 billion of investments towards energy efficiency in new buildings and existing industrial facilities. This share of investments need to increase drastically over the coming years. Development banks can provide concessional loans to sustainable building projects and housing programs. They can also develop innovative public-private partnerships, such as revolving funds, energy services, and other performance contracting schemes. However, a lot more is still needed to scale up action and contribute to market transformation. AFD, the French Development Bank, has the ambition to be 100% compatible with Paris Agreement targets for all its projects and is eager to help rebalance investments towards energy efficiency. Since 2018, energy efficiency is a priority axis of AFD's energy strategy framework, and the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, PEEB, is one key lever of this strategy. PEEB is a French-German initiative launched at COP22 under the aegis of Global ABC to support the building transition in developing countries. It combines the expertise of GIZ, the German International Cooperation Agency, AFD, the French Development Bank, and ADEME, the French Agency for Ecological Transition. Since 2018, these institutions come together to provide policy support, large-scale project financing, and professional capacity building. At AFD, PEEB provides technical assistance to improve the climate impact of large building construction and renovation projects across sectors, from social housing, hospitals, and health centers to universities, schools, office buildings, and industrial facilities. Currently, over 40 large-scale social infrastructure projects across 25 developing countries benefit from PEEB support. In 2021, these projects represented about 3 billion euros worth of AFD's financing pipeline. Combined with policy support and capacity building, these investments have a potential to shift practices in the buildings and construction sector. However, technical assistance alone is often insufficient to trigger investors to overcome initial financial barriers and lower their perception of risk. Investment grants can be part of the solution by partially covering the extra costs of energy efficiency measures and bring down their payback time. PEEB is therefore welcoming new donors in order to combine technical assistance with investment grants to shift financial flows towards energy efficiency. Later this year, AFD and the European Commission will partner up with the launch of a new regional PEEB initiative for countries of the southern Mediterranean region. This PEEB-MED will combine technical assistance with investment grants for public sector infrastructure investments in a region where rising temperatures are increasingly putting populations at risk and energy demand will keep growing. AFD has also started sharing the experience it has gained in the context of PEEB with other development banks. At COP26, the International Development Finance Club, IDFC, as mentioned before, launched with PEEB a green buildings cooperation to coordinate, raise awareness, and share knowledge among IDFC member institutions. IDFC has set an objective to achieve $1 trillion of climate finance by 2025, and greening building sector investments is one of the best opportunities we have to achieve this target and bring a significant contribution to the reduction of the global climate footprint. Many thanks, Marina. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. We had planned for 15 minutes exchange with the public online and here in the room. But before that, I would like to turn to Kenya, and I would like to invite Elizabeth Chege, who's energy efficiency and cooling specialist at Sustainable Energy for All. She's the vice chairwoman of the World Green Building Council, and she's the chairwoman for the regional chapter for Africa. So we are eager to know what your plans are and what is your analysis, Elizabeth, ahead of COP27, the African COP. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on board. Let me know if you cannot hear me. I can see the panel looking back. Thank you, awesome. I've seen a thumbs up. So part of this presentation I'm bringing forward, I'd like to align it towards the COP27 days, the presidency days that have been announced already. But first of all, congratulations on the report that has been issued and also the tool that has been presented today. So one of the things that has been discussed just now around finance, we note that in every $100, only 3% is invested in energy efficiency. But at the same time, some of the countries across the region have already started doing their national energy efficiency plans. And part of that is to have a strategic plan as well as an implementation plan. Beyond that, we see that a lot of the countries are also looking at either upgrading the building codes, if they have them, and there's those that don't have building codes. Another aspect is that with the energy efficiency codes that we have and we're currently using to build, they're not aligned to the climate targets. So I really like what Franz actually talked about, aligning to the climate targets. So there's an opportunity around using science to align what we're actually trying to do over the next few years. You might note also that 800 million more people will be living in the region, and by 2050, the buildings that will exist have not been built yet. So when we talk about buildings in Africa or the region, we're also talking about the built environment and infrastructure, because there's a great focus on infrastructure. So when we talk about energy efficiency, it's not one building at a time, but it's also the whole process around building infrastructure as well as the buildings themselves. We also know that we have a huge deficit in buildings, especially residential buildings. So 65%, for example, in Kenya, of the construction that will happen in the near future will actually be residential buildings, and these are affordable housing. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's not on the basis that they shouldn't be green, they shouldn't be efficient. If anything, sustainability of these buildings must also impact on the people who will live in them in the long run. So discussing around the COP27 days coming up, we do have regular meetings every month, and that's called Building to COP27. And the coalition around buildings hosts that. So if we talk about finance, not enough of the finance is actually getting to the ground. And most of the times, clearly indicated is that the investments do not get to the developers. The green mortgages are not yet in place. So the message from the ground on the basis of finance is that the people cannot access this finance. So we need to be very innovative about accessing finance. If we talk about adaptation, there's an emerging challenge, which is cooling buildings. So in a warming climate and in a region that is warming up and part of the high risk impact countries, as indicated by Sustainable Energy for All, 1.2 billion rural and urban people are at high risk in 2030 because they lack access to cooling. And this access to cooling is not just air conditioning or thermal comfort. It's also cooling in our hospitals, healthcare, cooling for vaccine, agricultural produce. So now this starts looking at cold chains and the infrastructure around our food losses. So the SDGs around meeting greenhouse gas emissions, for example, if you meet SDG 7.1, we would also have to look at SDG 1.1 to actually reduce the numbers at risk by 36%. So it means a lot more work connecting how we are actually approaching buildings, the built environment, and the people at the center of that. Mm-hmm. If I put together energy, water, and decarbonization days that have been indicated for COP27, definitely the focus on using less energy-intensive materials has been considered. But you'll also note that the industries here in Africa are yet to develop and adopt decarbonization. So there's a great opportunity towards that in COP27. We know that energy efficiency gains come from reducing demand by enhancing passive solutions. So another opportunity is how we design our cities, how we plan them before we even start building each building at a time. So Science Day itself provides a great opportunity, especially around this mandatory building codes aligning to the climate change mitigation adaptation targets. But the urgency for this needs to also align with the support that would come in on financing, drafting these building codes to be able to align, similar to the tool that has been presented, to say if you adopt this building code, this is how much you'll actually save on greenhouse gas emissions from the buildings. On Solutions Day, definitely the platforms that bring people together, for example, Marrakesh Partnership that has been mentioned by Nora, there's Mission Efficiency platform as well. The World Green Building Council has commitments on net zero carbon, really allow for less of the silo efforts that we see around the continent and the region. So really encourage these collaborative efforts and transfer of skills as well to get the over 60% youth that we have in Africa towards being part of this conversation. To the last few points, when we say there is Biodiversity Day at COP27, and we talk about the equivalent of Paris is added in floor space every 5 days, and that of Japan every year until 2060, and the buildings that will stand in 2050 haven't been built yet, it means that we really need to have a balance between biodiversity and the built environment. And there's no reason to treat the two separately. We need to work together. Lastly, on gender, youth, and civil society, we find that the conversation around employment, inclusivity, will also be a big conversation. And COP27 has been dubbed to be the COP for the African people. On the ground, there's a lot of requests, opportunities to actually attend this COP, different from COP26, but it's also to break down the message so that people understand what buildings are about. When we talk about materials, we talk about energy, we talk about those industries and the value chain around them, including policies, will also require a lot of awareness and capacity building so that we can shift the masses to be part of the champions towards the goals that we're putting forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I really like the people here and in the remote audience to know your motto, which is what we build today will form the Africas of tomorrow. And I found your presentation really inspiring and really forward-looking, not just to COP27, but what really lies ahead. I mean, what you said, Africa has 60% of its population is youth, and these young people will need housing, hospitals, universities, and we often talked about thermal comfort, and as you said, it's not just comfort, a matter of cooling our houses 1 or 2 degrees less, but it's a matter of saving lives. So thank you very much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate. We have maybe 4 minutes for questions. Thibault from NDC Partnership is in the room, and I would like to give Thibault the floor. Thibault. Hello, nice to see you.
Thank you very much. Very nice to see you too. Nice to see the panelists, those online too. And thank you very much for these very interesting and inspiring presentations. I would like to make a comment about adaptation. Just to tell you very, very briefly, with the NDC partnership, we're working with 80 developing countries. And they send us plenty of requests on all types of sectors. Building is obviously one of them. And interestingly, we have a very important share of adaptation requests that are focused on the building sector. Or I should rather say, or building requests that are focused on adaptation rather than mitigation. Obviously, you have everything that relates to cooling and heating, how to make the buildings more habitable. But there's also a lot that relates to issues such as resilience, how to protect buildings from disaster risk, from all the disaster risk. And I think that all these are very linked to mitigation and to what we were talking about, because on cooling and heating, it's obvious. If you better design buildings, you will not have to use energy to cool them down or heat them up. And if you build buildings in the right spots, that are buildings that won't be destroyed by disasters, you're also saving on the materials that you will need to rebuild them. So that was my comment, and I also wanted to say, to build up on the comments of the last speaker, that or the requests that we receive within the partnership have an average of 70% of support. When you look at buildings in the in the building sector, which comes from our poorest of the countries, this average is 40%, which means that there's a huge gap in terms of support, and we need to, I think we urgently need to address this gap.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thibault. Are there any other questions in the room for the panelists here or the panelists who are online? And if not, I would like, we need to free the room in less than 5 minutes. I would really like to thank you all. I would like, I see Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, eager and looking forward to meet you in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thank you for all you are doing and raising awareness on this important topic. Jérémy Bourgault, thank you very much from AFD, PEEB, Régis Mégère from the French Minister of the Ecological Transition, Nora Stoller from the Global ABC. Thank you to you, and thank you, of course, to Ambassador Crouzat, Oliver Rapt, and of course, Jigme. Thank you very much, and I invite you all to scan the Buildings Monitoring Compendium, or to pick up the memory stick. And I, of course, invite you to visit the websites of the BPIE and the PEEB and the UNFCCC website. Thank you very much. Have a beautiful evening here in Bonn. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.